Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Better now.
Good, good. Well, thank you for being here today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting
Yeah,
for me too.
yeah, absolutely. Let's just jump right in. First
Okay.
off, how did you get into writing?
Well, it's a funny story. So when I was in the army, I had a lot of downtime sometimes, so I started reading. And when I got out, I continued reading and I read everything I get my hands on for years and years and years. And I didn't ever think about writing. I just like to read. And then
Okay.
I got to a point where I felt like I consumed everything I knew about or that I was interested in. And I kind of got into a reading slump. And so I started going to the library. And I found a book at the library. When I opened it up and started reading it, I thought it was the most horrible book I've ever read.
Oh no.
And I didn't understand how someone could write something like that. So, in a little bit of frustration, I decided to write something myself. I said, "Well, if this person could be published, maybe I could write something that people would like to read." And so I went ahead and wrote a chapter, and then I sent it to my brother, who's my older brother, and he is a very heavy critic. So I knew he would tell me the truth, but I
Okay.
didn't tell him any information about what it was about, or that it was I that wrote it, or anything like that. When he wrote it back, and then he read it, and then he told me, he was like, he was basically like, this is good. Who is it? Is it a new author? And so I felt pretty good about that.
Yeah.
And then for that point on, I kept writing, and I found that the story just came on its own. And then once I finished an entire book, I realized that I really enjoyed it. And after that, I didn't want to stop. So that's how I got started.
That's so interesting. You kind of just fell into it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I
Yeah.
had no plans to do it.
Right.
I really liked reading. And then I got to a point where I felt like I was frustrated with some of the books I was reading. And I thought, well, I'm going to give this a shot. And so
Right.
I did it.
That's really, really cool. I love that. Can you tell me a bit about your stories with Raventell? Tell me all about them. What
Okay.
inspired them? Everything.
Well, so I had been self-publishing for a while, and so I've been going through kind of I mean, I was a pretty fresh writer when I started writing. I had no real experience, so I didn't really know what I was doing necessarily. I knew the kind of books and stories that I liked to read, and I decided I wanted to write something that I wanted to read.
Mhm.
So when I first started writing, I had characters in mind, I had plots, but I would say that I was a little timid. I wasn't comfortable with my own writing. I wasn't comfortable with pushing the boundaries of things at times. So I wrote more PG-13 kind of books and stories, and then the complexity of the plots weren't as detailed because I was afraid of losing myself in the plot and then writing a book that people couldn't keep track of. So anyway, I wrote book after book as a self-published author, and then I finally got to the point where I felt pretty confident and pretty good about what I was doing, and I knew the kind of character I wanted to create. I kind of searched through writing and discovered who interested me as a main character, and that's Jacobus Shaw came from that, and he's an ex-warlock. This is in the series, the Ways of the Warlock series, and so the kind of character I wanted was someone who isn't invincible, is flawed, but has a lot of power in his own way, but also is limited in how he can use that power. So when you write a story that gives him human traits where he can't just do anything, but he has to be smart about how he does things, so that when he goes up against other powerful beings or magic users or situations that are difficult, he's got to figure out how to manage that. And it's got to be realistic. So when you read it, you're like, oh, there's actual stakes involved here.
Yeah.
And so that was the character that I kind of came upon and grew to create. He's an ex warlock who had a murderous past. He did a lot of horrible things in his past, and that warlocks generally are the type of people that are willing to sacrifice and do bad things in the name of a dark deity to gain power. So he was willing to do anything. He was basically the worst of the worst. And then he had something happen in his life, which I plan on having that come out throughout the books. So I don't want to give too much away. But basically he decided to renounce those ways. And so when he did that, the god that he kind of used and swore to is an elder god. He kind of got mad and he casted him into a prison. And he stayed there for a while, and then he escaped. And when he got out, he just wanted to lay low and not really do much. He just wanted to kind of figure out who he was and kind of figure out what was going on, because his whole life had changed. And then that's kind of where the books start up, is that, he's kind of laying low in Flagstaff, Arizona. He's got this bar that he's trying to manage, and he's trying to just do normal human things. But of
Mhm.
course, stuff that he did in his past kind of starts creeping back, and then it kind of throws him back into that world. And then in the meantime, he's got to learn how to operate in a different world with a different mindset, and try to, do things in a better way. But he still has his ties to his power and his darkness that he can use. So it's almost like Constantine in a way, where he has power, he uses it. He's not really always a nice guy, and he's willing to go dark if he needs to get the job done.
Characters like that are so fascinating, especially if they're morally great. They're just more fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's close to human nature, where, as a person, we all have a good and bad side, and we all try to operate usually, good, and present the world a good face. But there are times where sometimes you have to be not so nice, and you have to do that either to defend yourself or whatever it is in life. Sometimes you have to dig deep and find something that's a little stronger. And I think that kind of person or that character, speaks to us when we read stuff like that. It makes it more interesting, at least to me.
So tell me about your other series too.
Oh yeah. So I wrote and write primarily urban fantasy, dark urban fantasy. So when I submitted my work to Raventail, somebody on Facebook was like, "Hey, you should submit this book to Raventail. I think it'd be great." That was the Ways of the Warlock series, and then they picked it up, and I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." But Raventail is a horror publisher, from DSP, so it was new to me, and I was surprised that they liked the Ways of the Warlock, because when I wrote it, I didn't necessarily write it as a horror novel, but I do like to write very dark, menacing, scary, very grip you characters and creatures in my books, like all of them. I like that darkness.
Yeah,
so I think
it'll appeal to the audience.
Yeah, so I think that picked it up, and they really enjoyed it. So then they came to me, and they're doing, obviously, they're doing the creature features, where they're seeing a market for these stories about creatures and different stuff. And so they're like, "Hey, you want to do it?" I was like, "Absolutely." I love opportunities. I've been a self-published author for a while, and the one thing that's hard to have as a self-published author is an opportunity. You have to either make it your way, you have to figure out a lot of things. It's difficult. You have to juggle all aspects of publishing. And for some of us, that's hard, especially if you're a single parent, you've got a full-time job, you haven't quite hit it yet, rich with the books, and you haven't been able to just do that full-time. So it's a lot to do. So when they offered me, there's like, "Hey, let's do a horror story." I said, "Absolutely." And so I liked the Stranger Things, Goonies, kind of ET sort of, with you have like younger people that get kind of thrown into a situation that's just crazy. And so with Dimensions of Death, they wanted something water-based. So I came up with the idea of the events taking place on Lake Springbow, and during 4th of July kind of weekend. And it follows two teenage girls who kind of come face to face with a creature that's come from a different dimension, and they have to kind of struggle for their life. And it's different than anything I've ever written, but I really enjoyed it. I also wrote a third person, which was different, but it was really awesome because I could delve into each different character as this omnipresent narrator, which when you do single person narrative, that's a little bit different, because you only kind of live through that first person. And so I thought that was really, really fun.
Very cool. Very cool. What are some of your current new projects?
Well, I'm doing a second Dimensions of Death.
Okay.
So they wanted another one, so I'm working on a second one of that. Right now, I try to juggle the demands and the wants from the publisher, but I've also got other books that I've self-published that I'm working on. But they're not really in the genre of the horror novels. So for this purpose, I got a couple other projects I'm working on, but I'm trying to get the second novel done, because I do think the opportunity with Raventail is very important to keep pursuing and keep pushing out stories. So I'm working on a second one of that.
Nice. Creature features are so popular right now too. That's how I found Raventail. I love those type of books.
Yeah, I didn't even know that sort of thing was out there. I didn't even really understand the horror genre and all the different aspects of it. I mean, when I got on with Raventail, I started looking into it, and there's all kinds of horror genres and subgenres. It's amazing.
It's wild. Yeah. I know. What are some writers or just books in general that kind of inspired you in writing some of your books, or just as you got into reading,
Well, I started off, not necessarily when I first started reading, wasn't necessarily authors, but genres. I fell in love early on with like the Dragonlance series, the fantasy, epic adventure, Lord of the Rings, that sort of thing, where the group of travelers get together and they go on this epic journey. And then it morphed over time to I picked up horror novels. Stephen King obviously is amazing, and the stuff he does with this visceral kind of writing where it pulls you in and you feel the fear and you feel those deep emotions. I love Stephen King. Dean Koontz, the Brian Lumley series, a lot of the stuff he writes, I think is just amazing.
I need to read Dean Koontz. I haven't read his books
Brian Lumley?
Oh, well, yeah, I have to.
Would you say Stephen King?
Dean Koontz. I really want to read his books. I don't know where to start though.
Dean Koontz, you got to love dogs because he always puts a Labrador in all of his books.
Oh, okay. Yeah, is the dog safe? Is the dog safe in the books? I can't read about.
Yes, the dog is usually like.
Okay. I can't.
The dog is usually like an emissary of goodness. And,
oh, okay.
He's always got like this dog that kind of is like the hand of good. And if you read any of his books, you'll see what I mean. But the dog's usually always safe. Yeah, I don't think so. So anyway, yeah, and I just love reading anything that grabs my attention. Really, the inspiration for the horror novels that I write comes much more from the slasher films that I watched growing up. My mom, when I was growing up, she was really into the horror movies. So when I was a kid, we used to go to this is old now, and I feel like I'm aging myself. But when I was a kid, we'd go to the video store.
I went to Blockbuster too.
Yeah. So there was nothing better. You go to Blockbuster, we'd get 2-3 movies. She'd always get like a creature feature or like just a horror movie, Mm-hmm. And I was the only one. I had 2 older brothers. I was the only one that would sit down and watch them with her all the time. Yeah. So I grew up on like those 80s slasher, 90s horror, blood-soaked, Nightmare on Elm Street, Jason, all of those movies. Yeah. So a lot of that comes through in my writing.
Yeah. And I feel like with, I have your book right here, Dimension of Death. When I saw this, I was like, it's giving me Freddy Krueger vibes. It's giving me stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and the creature, he's kind of like a mimic in a way. So one of the things that they does is that he likes to present himself to whoever he's going after in something that is they trust the most. So a lot of times some of the shapeshifters and the mimics will go after people, but they'll present the most fearsome thing they could think of to scare the person because they're feed on fear, especially with like Stephen King's It. Did that a lot, right? And they'd find their fear. I kind of thought it was creepier and more intense to present yourself as something that somebody loves and cherishes, and then twist it so that they kind of trust you and they're like, oh my God, look, there's my best friend from high school I haven't seen in 20 years. Right. And then it's like a fishing lure. You don't catch fish unless you give them something they want, and then you can hook them once they take the bait.
What do you think it is about the horror genre that makes it so popular for readers right now?
I think people just like to be scared.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
It's a rush,
Yeah.
And I think, in today's society and just in general, we live in a pretty safe society. We don't have to go out and do crazy things for our food. We don't have to go out there and risk our lives a lot of times. And so, but I think deep down we want, and we've always known that those struggles are real and they can be real. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes with the horror genre, it taps into that kind of visceral fear. And honestly, I think as humanity itself as a tribal people, and that we have memories of times where there were creatures and there were things out there that could kill us.
Yeah,
and that
definitely.
Was scary.
Yeah.
And I think that also kind of lets you know you're alive when you go out there and you
that rush.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot of things. And I just think it's just awesome. That the horror genre itself is just really cool because it also can tap into so many different avenues of fear. You've got creatures, you've got technology fear, you've got ghosts, you've got magic, you've got witches. It's endless.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Your story, Dimension of Death, it's a creature feature. Are there any other creatures that you would like to write about in the future, if given the opportunity?
One of my favorite movies of all time was The Cabin in the Woods. Have you seen that?
Is that where
movie?
The water is poisoned? No, is that something?
No. So I can't remember. It's one of my favorite movies, and I'm hoping I'm getting the title right. but it takes place where the kids, they're in college, they go to this cabin, and then when they get there, they find out that they get down to the basement and they kind of enact this ritual. And it's a ritual that all of them have to die and sacrifice themselves to an older god, an elder god. The beauty of the book
Oh,
movie.
is it Cabin at the End of the World?
No,
Or no?
I think it's Cabin in the Woods.
I think I know what you're talking. Okay, I know what you're talking about though.
But at the end of it, they all die. Like
Right.
the,
Yeah.
yes, the big monster comes out and kills them. So
Yeah.
I've always thought about, and I actually submitted a horror story for the horror anthology, for the Christmas anthology that might be coming out.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in the large, world-ending elder gods. So something huge like Cthulhu or Nyarlathotep, something like that, I think would be really interesting.
You definitely should. That sounds so cool. I love that. I love that. Going back to writing, what is your process like? How long does it take you to write a book? And what do you do when you get writer's block?
It has evolved over the years.
Yeah.
When I wrote my first novel, all I had were a few big scenes in my head that I wanted to present, but how I got there, I had no idea. And the story took place as I wrote it. I mean, it literally kind of wrote itself as I wrote. I was like, oh, this is where we're going to go. And the beauty of that, when I realized is that, when people read books, sometimes they think, well, how did he create this plot that just all works together? And it's, when you're a writer, you're like God. You can do whatever you want. Yeah. You can justify anything if you're smart enough in how you present it. And if you find the right genre, then you can introduce certain tropes and certain things that connect it all. And so over time, I started to realize these tricks and these techniques and how to create more intricate plots. So long story short, I started off doing no plots, no plot progression, nothing. As I wanted to write plots and more intricate stories that made you think until the very end, I love plot twists. I love creating a scenario where I don't give you anything or everything. I give you enough that if you're really into it, you could possibly piece it together. But at that last big payoff scene or that last big crescendo in the book, like the last 1/3 or 2/3, it reveals itself and you're like, that was awesome.
Those are the best.
Yes. So that is what I try to put in every single book that I write. I try to put in something that builds and then crescendos to where you're just like, that was so cool. So in order to do that, I have to plot that out more.
Yeah.
So now I kind of have a beginning, a middle, an end, and then I have the twist. And then how I piece that all together happens usually as I write. And usually when I get into the story, it just flows. And I almost have to stop myself from writing. I have to take breaks. But now that I've got a 16-year-old daughter and she's living with me full time, so it's a little different. I have a little bit more demand on my schedule. So now I kind of come in when I can. I set aside 2 or 3 hours a night and I try to get in and I try to just write, get some words down, and then keep it going. I have found the best thing to do for writer's block is to keep writing. You force something out each day. And even if it's not good, or if you feel like it isn't inspired, you have to move on past that point where you're stuck. And then you flow into the next point. And then when you get your mojo back, your juju, you go back and you can fix what you thought was stale.
Right. Yeah.
And then whenever I get stuck on a plot point, I go for a drive and I listen to heavy metal music. And in my brain, these music videos take place and scenes are created like videos in my head.
Right.
And it usually the pieces fall into place. I take that and it usually becomes an action sequence or something really cool that I then incorporate in my story.
I love that. That's so cool. What is some advice you would give to aspiring writers?
Don't stop. And don't ever imagine that your story's been done before or that it's not good enough. You have to just write, because a little secret, it's hard to write a totally original story. Oh, yeah. So many stories are already done and so many ideas are already out there. You're not going to write a story about a creature that feeds on people's fears. That's already been written 1,000 times, but that's okay. Because when you write it, it's going to be yours. You're going to put your fingerprint on it. And you may do something a little bit different, a little bit unique. You just got to write it and then don't stop. Get it to completion. That's the biggest thing. Cause when I first started writing and I put out a few books and I started telling people, it's like, hey, I write, you want to read something I got? It's always your friends. And then everyone's like, oh, I started a book. Oh, I started a book. But the main theme was they started, but they never finished.
Right.
And so that's the hard part, I think, for a writer. And then once you finish and you realize you can do it, you're like, oh, this isn't an insurmountable obstacle that I can never accomplish. And it wasn't that hard. I mean, it really, once I get it done, you're like, wow, I survived. I did it.
Yeah.
I can do it again now.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. That was just about the last question that I had. But the last thing I want to ask is, where can people find you on social media?
Oh, well, I'm on Facebook. So I've got a Facebook page, Marcus Abshire, author. I'm active in the Raventail community. So the Raventail readers, and which is a great place to go, because then you can also get books to do reviews on, which I think is an awesome thing that Raventail does. I have a TikTok account that I post videos on.
I love your videos.
Thanks. I try to do.
They're funny.
I try to do things that are funny, that kind of are just advertisements, and then I don't know what hits. So TikTok is just like,
the algorithm is all over the place. You just got to throw stuff out there.
I throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And then you can always go to the Amazon, where I've got my author page there. But mainly, I would say that probably the most active place I'd be is on Facebook.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
You're welcome.
I hope you have a great rest of your week. I am so excited to see what else you continue to write. Your books sound incredible.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, you have a good one, Marcus. Thank you.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.